You're listening to the Divorce and Your Money Show, the number one divorce podcast in the United States, trusted by hundreds of thousands of people nationwide. I'm your host, Sean Lehman, MBA and certified divorce financial analyst. You can visit us at divorceandyourmoney.com. And when you get there, you'll have access to tons of amazing resources, including booking a coaching call with me directly, or you can visit our store, where you can get access to almost 200 episodes of the Divorce and Your Money podcast. When negotiating a divorce settlement, you need to understand what trade-offs you're making and make sure that you're keeping the big picture in mind. When it comes to your assets and the debts that you have in your financial life and your marriage, they are what they are. So when you're thinking about your divorce settlement and your future, your goal really is to figure out what the best combination of assets is for you so that you can move on with your life in the best way possible. And you need to be realistic and reasonable and make sure you're negotiating for things that make sense for you. One of the biggest areas I see people having trouble is not being accepting of what the status quo, what today, what their actual financial picture is, and not confronting head on what you actually have. Look, I understand everyone wishes they had more money, more cash, less debt, a higher income, or whatever it is. And what I see oftentimes in the divorce process when working with you is that you might feel or at least pretend to negotiate as if you have a higher income than you have, or as if you have more money than you actually have. And it's okay to, and I'll say this on calls all the time, it's okay to advocate for yourself and ask for a little bit more so that you have wiggle room. But at the same time, you need to be realistic about what your financial picture is and what your future looks like, and be real about how that's going to work for you in the future. And so one of the first steps when it comes to negotiating and thinking about your divorce settlement and preparing and structuring things the way that you want to do, whether you're working with a lawyer, you're doing it yourself, going through the litigation process, doing collaborative divorce or whatever, is you really need to understand what you have and what you're splitting with your soon-to-be ex-spouse. And not only do you need to know what exists, be it a house, a mortgage, rental property, investment accounts, cars, a business, all of the basic stuff that we talk about a lot on the show, but you need to understand the value of those things with clear numbers and specifics. It's not enough just to say, I have a house and I think it's worth $400,000. That's not right. You need to do your homework and figure out, either with a real estate agent or an appraisal or whatever the case may be, whether it's $400,000 or whether it's 375 because of something, or maybe it's for 37,000 that you could sell it for. You need to understand the value of that. You need to understand, if you have a rental property, if you have a business, really, what is that worth? Because knowing that value could serve as a big impact on your divorce process. And when it comes to knowing the worth of things, you need to know what that means in total. So one of the questions I'll ask you is, I'll say, hey, let's break down the major assets. Let's figure out what you have. We'll subtract out any debts. But what is your total marital pot worth? Is it $325,000? Is it $3.2 million? Or more than that? Or somewhere in between, or somewhere less? Whatever the number is, you need to clearly understand and keep in mind the total value of all of your assets as you're thinking about your divorce settlement. And then from there, you also need to understand and have a clear sense of what support obligations you will either be paying or receiving. This is an important point and is relevant to the total calculation of stuff that you're splitting up, and you need to understand that number. And I'm going to make use some simple numbers just for the sake of discussion on these 2 points: the total value of your assets and then also the support discussion, to illustrate an example for you. Let's say the total value of all of your assets is $200,000. That means the houses, bank accounts, retirement accounts, everything totals up to $200,000 between you and your soon to be ex spouse. Now, let's say on top of that, you're expecting to receive some sort of financial support obligations. For the sake of discussion, I'm going to assume that you're going to receive $5,000 a month for 5 years, which means $12,000 a year times 5 years is $60,000 in support. Now, if you think about that, that actually adds to the total amount of money that you are splitting up. Not only are you splitting your $200,000 of marital assets, but there's also an additional $60,000 on top of that that you need to keep in mind. Now, why is that such a big deal? Well, that's a big deal because when it comes to negotiating a divorce settlement and thinking about your options, is that you need to understand that regardless of what you do, there's always benefits and disadvantages and potentially trade-offs that may work better for you that you haven't considered or are still thinking about. So let's take this example. Let's just say, since you're going to be getting 60,000 in support over 5 years, on top of your share of the marital assets. Well, what would I be thinking if I'm doing a coaching session with you, or if we're working more in depth together? One of the first things I would think, and just on my mental checklist, is all right. Let's just say you're the person receiving support. You're going to be getting about $100,000 in assets that you're splitting because you have $200,000 pot. So you're going to split that in half, roughly. It varies, but let's just say for simplicity's sake, you're going to be getting about 100,000. Plus, you're going to be getting about $60,000 in spousal support over 5 years. So in total, you're going to be getting $160,000 from the marital pot. Well, when I think about that, I say, okay, do you want all of that now? Would you like to take all that up front, or do you not mind getting support over the 5 years? And so one thing I might say, particularly if you don't want to be reliant upon your ex-spouse, or if you need cash up front to get yourself back on your feet, I might say, hey, the $100,000 is pretty easy to split because it's, mostly coming from a retirement account or something. That extra 60, well, what if we made it $50,000 instead of 60 because you're going to get it all up front, and we just took out extra, and maybe your spouse keeps the house and just cashes out some of the equity to pay you off. That's an option that I just kind of made up off the top of my head. But the point is sometimes you need to think about, well, you know what? It's actually a better scenario if I get more money up front and take that money now rather than take that money over time. And your spouse actually might give you less money for that effect, but it could be worth it to you. You're no longer waiting on those monthly payments to clear every month. Who knows what happens? And on top of that, maybe you get some spending money up front as you move to a new place or move to a new town, or are in school for a little while. And that additional support up front could be very useful to you. And also the converse is true in terms of thinking of your trade-offs. Let's stick to this example. For some of you, if you've never really created and stuck to a budget before, and you think you're going to blow through all of that money up front, maybe it's wiser for you to take those payments monthly, that $1,000 a month each month for the next 5 years, because it will help you plan and budget better. Someone like me, I know myself well enough. Oftentimes, that would be a much better deal for me personally, because the way that I think about money and spending and cash flow, etc., sometimes it's more valuable to kind of have that stable payment coming rather than, if you're one who is potentially tempted by having a lot of money sitting around in a bank account, then it's better off that you just kind of take those payments over time, and it might be worth it for you. Now, conversely, if you're on the other side of things and you're the spouse making these payments, it can be very important and very well worth considering. Well, do you really want to write a check every month for the next however many months you're going to be paying support? Or maybe you can sort of buy out all of that support up front, or a large chunk of that support up front from your previous savings, be it retirement or from cashing out of a house or otherwise, because that will give you the advantage of maybe having more flexibility later. I'll give you an example. I have a friend of mine here in Texas who basically said, hey, to their spouse, I'm going to give you 80% of the assets that we have in exchange. I'm not going to, pay you any ongoing support. But this person in particular is an entrepreneur and he knew he could make the money back. And so he did. And so he said, hey, you know what? It's worth it for me just to pay all of my support obligations. Now you'll be comfortable. You won't have any issues. And I'm not going to be writing that check every month. And then I'll just have to find a way to re-earn and rebuild myself financially in that case. And so if you're the one paying, it can also be a win for you to think about some of these trade-offs, because you can actually clean up your financial picture a lot by not having this ongoing monthly bill, or reducing that monthly support payment substantially over time just by understanding some of your trade-offs. You have options and leeway in terms of thinking about, well, maybe a lump sum is better for all parties involved, or maybe it's not, or maybe a partial lump sum is better, where we front load support a little bit, give more of it up front and less later. Maybe there are other considerations where we structure a deal so that everyone ultimately is better off. Maybe more support comes, you can have higher monthly payments for the first 2 years and then slightly lower the next 2 years, or something like that, so that everyone kind of ends up in a better position possible. But when you're thinking about your finances and your picture and your divorce and your settlement, I want you to look with a little bit more creativity in terms of solutions. Is understand, all right, well, here are all these numbers on a sheet of paper that you have. They're going to be assets and debts and everything else. What's the best way that we can come to an agreement using these assets? And what are some ways that I might not have thought about before in terms of getting a benefit from these assets and things that we need to do? Something for you to think about. And regardless of where you are in your divorce settlement process, if you haven't started or you're in the middle of the process, what I want you to do is a little bit of homework, as you have a picture in mind in terms of who's going to get what and how those things are going to be split. Well, what I want you to do is come up with some alternate scenarios where financially everyone ends up just about the same, but you're getting a different set of assets and debts and splitting it a different way. Come up with one or two or three more scenarios, or I can help you come up with those scenarios as well, but different ways to think about your picture. And sometimes when you do that, you will come up with some of the best settlements that I've had the pleasure of working with are literally that exercise where you think you got to do things one way, but let's say, hey, let's split things a totally different way. And let's just see how that looks and see if everyone is agreeable for it and if there might be something to it that would satisfy everyone involved. And just by at least doing the exercise, whether or not you ultimately stick to that path that you're on or consider some other ones, you can often come up with some really useful solutions that you may not know existed. But that's the nature of the divorce process. It's a complicated process. You're doing there's a lot of different moving parts, and sometimes you just need to use those moving parts and the complexity to your advantage to come up with something that's more creative than maybe you considered before, and actually it might be something that works better for everyone involved. Before you go, I want to make sure that you have some awesome resources that are sure to help you during the divorce process. You can find them all at divorceandyourmoney.com. The first thing is you can book a one-on-one coaching call directly with me. All you do is click on the coaching page or go to divorceandyourmoney.com/coaching, and you will have direct access to my calendar to book a time. And during the coaching calls, they're 30 minutes long, and we can discuss whatever is most pressing to you. Sometimes people call and say, am I making the right decisions during this process? They'll say, is my attorney doing a good job? Can I get a second opinion from you? Sometimes someone will say, well, is this what I should be asking for during the negotiations? Or one of my favorite things to do is come up with some creative solutions to splitting assets that you might not have thought about. Sometimes you'll say, well, does this settlement that I'm looking at that's on the table make sense for me, for my kids, for my future? Does it make sense for the long term? Or are there other issues that I'm just not thinking about that I should be as part of the divorce process? You can book those calls with me. We'll speak directly. They're very affordable, and we get into the issues that matter most to you. I look forward to speaking with you there. That's divorceandyourmoney.com/coaching. The other thing I want to bring to your attention is the store, where I have lots of excellent resources to help you. My favorite resource of all of them is the podcast archives. Now, only a few of the episodes are available for anyone to download. But in the archives, you can get almost 200 episodes of the Divorce and Your Money podcast. And what's great about it is that the episodes are organized into easy to understand topics. So if you just have questions about your house, there is a great section of several episodes, 7 or 8 episodes, for just on things about the house. Or if you have questions about post-divorce finances, things that you should be planning for, how to choose a financial advisor, that's in there too. If you want to have a section just on how to manage and have the best relationship possible with your divorce attorney, we have a section on that there. Or any number of things in the divorce process. There are many hours of information, and I've never had to give a refund on it because it is perhaps the most useful resource worth many, many thousands of dollars that I give to you for a very low price. So you can check that there in the store. Divorceandyourmoney.com is where you can get anything, you get access to me, and I look forward to speaking with you soon.